Welcome back, everyone. I'm Sam. I'm a software craftsperson at Codurance.
I'm Abdul, so I'm a delivery manager at Codurance.
Hi, I'm Mac. I'm software craftsperson here at Codurance.
Excellent. So last time around, we covered a few different subjects. One was sort of the greenfield versus sort of more that brownfield type of project. We talked about the different dynamics within the team, seniority, and it's worth noting that we only sort of scratched the surface on these topics. There's a lot more we can talk about, and we probably will talk about in these areas. But today, I think we wanted to talk more around the diversification of the type of work within software modernization. So maybe, I don't know, Mac, if you want to give a brief sort of overview of what we're going to cover, and then we'll sort of dive more into the details.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure exactly what we're going to cover. That's we're going to find it out exactly, and that's kind of the goal of the discussion as well, right? So to go in deep and let's see what we can come up with. But I think on a high level, it's about what is the difference between like a software modernization effort versus like a greenfield project and like a typical like maintenance project, let's say. So there's already an established product, and we just do some business as usual, and how the work that is expected from that kind of team differs to those other more typical like endeavors, let's say, in the IT world, I would say. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Maybe it's useful to sort of maybe define some terms that I guess we'll use, or at least the terms that we tend to use between ourselves. So like there's obviously like the core aspect of the work, which is you're undertaking a software modernization effort. You're sort of trying to solve a specific problem. And that is what we define as the core. Like you're trying to achieve that particular goal. But obviously along the way, there's lots of things that need to be done. And we've spoken about as well offline around how these aren't done because of whatever reason. Maybe the organization prioritized delivery over these other aspects. And obviously we know at some point that will come back to usually bite that decision because delivery usually then slows down because you've prioritized delivery over these other aspects. So things like, even setting up, automating the SDLC, etc. And that would be sort of, I guess, innovation work that would be alongside the core work. But it's definitely a balance, right?
Maybe we can like revolve a bit around the those other two types of projects a bit, and then we'll have a more like understanding with like where modernization sits. So, typical modernization projects where this like business as usual, you have your typical Kanban board, and whatever comes up, bug fixes, some minor improvements. And like these teams are driven mostly like by some like SLAs. Right, so there are certain SLAs, and they have to meet. There's a problem. They have a week or an hour, depending on like the severity of the problem, basically. So that's kind of drives their day-to-day work, I would say. And usually, even if they would like to like improve things, like on a foundational level, they would have very little time for it. And maybe there's one person doing it here, other person doing it there. But then again, they are brought back to focusing on those tickets that keep coming in, and this is what business expects from them in the end. So it's very little time for that modernization and like foundational improvement, let's say, and it's not in their agenda, you might say. If someone does it, that's great, but it's not really in the agenda. And in terms of the greenfield, if you think about it, it's like everyone is so excited about them. Yes, it's like maybe the initial period, there's a lot of innovation, figuring out how this thing could work and, picking the tech stack. But once things settle, it's also about trying to hit those usually critical deadlines, right? Because it's a new feature, it's a new thing. The business wants to get it out to be ahead of the competition mostly. So again, after this initial very like fairy tale like start for the tech people, then it's about very harsh reality of trying to meet those really tight deadlines and like building the thing in the end, and not having time to think about keeping the technical debt low and that kind of stuff. So that might end up being like further down the priority list as well. So maintenance teams, they're driven by SLAs, and those greenfield projects, mostly they're driven by those like really tight deadlines at some point as well. And I think modernization team, it's a very unique one. I don't think there's no SLA, right? There's no like typical SLAs, or you might think that SLA is actually trying to improve things in the end. And there might be some deadlines, but I don't think there will be so tight, as in like there's a new feature, we have to get it out because the competition will be before us. And it's like ingrained, and this is this SLA for innovating, improving, sharing the knowledge kind of a thing. So
one question I have for you and Abdul is sort of so you have the core work, which makes up, it's going to make the majority of the time for a software modernization team. They're doing the core thing, that's solving the modernization problem. How do these sort of other pieces of work, like innovation, for instance, how would you say that they come about? Given that these teams are spending a lot of their time on the core work, how would you say they come about? We can get into how people make a case for why they should be done, but like, how do they come about?
It all depends very much on the context of where the business is at. So, as I say, I think Mac put quite well. When a company is in growth phase, I think it's all about survival, right? You need to grow or you will die as a business. So at that point, it's usually all about features and capturing an established part of the market. So I think where you end up after that is with a stable platform. You're now an established business with a stable portion of the market share, and you're now both defending your existing market share while potentially trying to grow it. And I think that's where you end up in this situation where a more diverse set of work appears, right? So you've got an existing customer base that has expectations that you have to meet, which are usually a bit more blander, for lack of a better term. Like the competition has a website that loads a bit quicker than yours, and that kind of, you lose about 0.5% of your customer base that way. So we need to improve the performance, or you've got certain errors and exceptions that are affecting your conversion flow. And these can be urgent enough that you need to immediately resolve them. So you end up in the land of P1s and P2s because you're no longer an innovator. You're established. You've got a market. You're there. But then there's the other tension, which is still trying to grow, right? So it's not just about maintaining where you are. It's trying to grow that platform to remain competitive against your competitors, and also remain competitive against new entrants into your market that might be, innovating at a pace that you are no longer capable of maintaining. I think then that tension is where you end up in a situation where you have to potentially look at how do you, reorganize your work to kind of represent those challenges. What parts of my system now need to be very innovative? I need like high levels of innovation in this area. Or alternatively, how do I reduce, all that tech that we've accumulated in our growth phase, and pay that down so that we have a system that can remain competitive in our established market space and provide the customer experience that people expect, and provide a platform that we can continue to maintain and grow on over the course of the lifetime of the business. And obviously that's a continuous process. So I think it's very intimately tied to the stage of the business. And I think those create new pressures that then require that look at an innovation team or a core team, or even things like knowledge teams, where you need to create more internal organizational knowledge about how to tackle many of your new challenges, if you will.
Yeah, so I guess a crucial sort of question is, you're working on a modernization team. You're doing the core work. How do you make a case? I've noticed that this part isn't automated, and actually this takes a lot of time. How do you start building up a case to start doing that? And then my follow-up then is who does that work as well? Is it always the same team that identified the issue, or sometimes do you bring in other people for support?
I think the first thing is to take implicit knowledge and make it explicit. So often we look at a problem and we're very good at instinctively identifying that that's an issue. Oh, this isn't an automated process, that's a problem. What can be more challenging is turning that into an explicit understanding. Okay, this is a problem because every time they need a new build, we've got to build it manually from a local PC that has to be uploaded. There's an opportunity for the package to be corrupted in some capacity, for the wrong code to be built, for it to be built without passing tests, so there's quality issues. And you have to start on that basis, because really it could be your gut is wrong. And you look at that process and you think, oh, it should be modernized. And you look at the cost of automating or modernizing the software versus the business benefit, and it doesn't work out. And really, you should be investing your time elsewhere. But not in all probability, especially if you've got a lot of experience, it should be quite easy to actually start to have a real understanding of the impact to the business of this problem. And the quantification sometimes requires a bit of balancing. But when we talk about things like automation, if you're having to manually build package, that takes time. That means that engineers are out, watching a package build on their local PC. You've got to also think about the implications of defects. How much does that cost your business? If you've got P1s and P2s getting into production, how many of those are caused because of potentially software being released that hasn't passed tests, because you have no way of enforcing that? So I think once you do that kind of level of analysis, then it becomes easier to justify. And I would even argue, even if you've got like a lean budget, so you've got fixed budgets, you should still do a level of this. You should still understand, why are you investing in an area? You shouldn't be just saying, well, this seems like a really cool thing to do. Yeah, cool. But there might be another area where you're hemorrhaging resources, essentially. So I think that's the first piece. On the second piece about who should do it, I think, in my experience, usually I think you need sometimes a bit of a blend, depending on the circumstance. Sometimes the core team has the skills to address it and the capacity, and they can just do it. Other times they don't. But in either event, I think you're always better served by having people with domain knowledge embedded in whoever solves that problem, right? What I've rarely seen work is a team with no real context at all come in and completely autonomously and separately from those that work with the primary product, deliver a solution in an efficient manner. You will always need, either it could be on a consultative basis, someone you can speak to, or it might be someone that's kind of semi-embedded. But I think you always need someone that is there that understands the business and the logic and the software to help you deliver a solution that's effective and going to solve the problem.
So maybe we could take a small step back and align maybe on like the small glossary of terms so that the audience knows like specifically what we're talking about. So in terms of core team, I think, Abdul, you meant like a product team somewhere in the company that they own specific workflow, specific area, I guess, and they're doing features and they're maintaining that. That's like the core team. And we have, in this context, I think we call it modernization teams, I guess, which will be explicitly trying to improve things and having this special license, right, to innovate. And I guess in terms of the core work, as we are mentioning, the core work of the modernization team, and it's usually some larger, like 3 to 6 months endeavor, I guess. That would be like the core work. They need to refactor, let's say, a critical area of the system. That would be their core work for 6 months. But modernization team can do more, right? So they can still continue to innovate, even though this is like their main thing, right? So usually for, a product team, they have a certain new feature, and that's all that's that they need to deliver, right? And for a modernization team, they have this larger chunk of work they'll be focusing on, but they always, like what I think 10 to 20% of the time, still think about innovating around that area, around that context. So it may be, let's say, staying in the example, so refactoring critical area, but also maybe improving the CI pipeline that is in there, maybe add a couple of steps that are missing, for example, and maybe a small innovation example. But it may be also treated as some kind of an incubation period in that team. And it may be actually that there's a more general problem, and the various CI pipelines in the company are very different and are not aligned, and there's no clear unified way to do them, let's say, and there should be. So maybe actually that could end up as a possible bigger initiative, proper initiative, which again be this 3 to 6 months thing for a certain modernization team to pick up, right? And adding to that pie chart of possible work for a modernization team, so you have the core work most of the time, then 20% of the time for like innovation, so around that area of that initiative, and 10 to 20% of the time to try to share all their findings and share the deliverables as well, ideally on an iterative basis, not after 3 to 6 months, then have a huge handover, ideally more often. And that kind of, this is like the pie chart of work, or the diversification of work for modernization team, let's say, right? So they have this like special license. It's like whatever they are given, it's also always trying to look outside of the box, innovate, and share all their findings, or maybe bring in some of the product team people along the ride as well for a month or two, so that they get upskilled, they know what's best practices they should be using from now on. So that I think is like in the terms I think that we can talk about.
Obviously, we spoke a little bit before around how you sort of maybe identify some of the innovations, etc., and make a case for them. How do you also ensure that your modernization team, going back to the pie chart, aren't reducing the core work so much that they get maybe working on these innovation, etc., pieces that actually starts to detract away from the core work, which is sort of the original mission, should we say, for the modernization team?
I don't think there's a clear answer for that. It may heavily depend on the stakeholder and the situation, because usually if we are modernizing, it's usually some larger system, there's some compliance, there's some governance, and sometimes naturally that core initiative may be hindered by some red tape. I don't know, there is just, there's no way you can put in more changes for that. There are more important things, product things, and your modernization things, they need to wait, let's say. And this is the time, okay, so we park this, and we had idea of so many innovations around, around the pipelines, around the DevOps, around creating some framework, new framework for testing, for acceptance testing, for example. Now is the time to shift that pie chart and reduce the core work, and naturally come in with more like innovations, and maybe do more seminars or some community of practice, and share more of the knowledge with the product teams, let's say. Of course, if stakeholder is fine with that, right? But in the end, it always should be about focusing on that main initiative, because that's what stakeholder will be looking at. This is most likely what's been agreed upon. There is some specific business outcome of that. There is some specific ROI if that comes live. So again, it's a bit of a balancing act for different teams in different stages. It may differ, let's say. So, but it's a good thing, right? Because it may be hindered, and there's always those two other things like various innovations and knowledge sharing, which the team can focus on when they really cannot move forward the core initiative.
Would it then be fair to say that if your pie chart looks like nearly whole core work, like nearly 100% core work, that you're sort of, as a company, sort of initiating the modernization effort, you're somewhat maybe losing some of the benefits of, the knowledge sharing, etc. Because if you're just focusing on the core work all the time, you don't have enough space for knowledge sharing as one aspect, and then innovation, then you are losing out on that sort of sharing with other teams, etc.
Well, the whole point of like modernizing, it's usually these teams will not have enough capacity to modernize everything. there's this scalability aspect, which requires other product teams, so majority of organization, to finally pick up the torch and doing the things that the modernization teams are proving through those initiatives. Because no one did it before. There's an initiative. They tried to modernize a critical part of the system. They succeeded. And now this is like the golden standard that needs to be repeated, ideally, at least by the new projects, let's say, some new development. And that cannot just happen, like they cannot just assimilate that in some way. That they need to have some kind of help for those software modernization teams to share that knowledge with them and help them with assimilate that. Because again, as we talk, they have those, they have the SLAs, they have the tight deadlines. They need this constant engine that is, proving things, but also showing them how to do it, how to replicate it, how not to repeat the mistakes from the past, basically. But I think at the beginning of a modernization effort, it will be mostly the core work, right? Because you need to really focus on what is the initiative. You need to do some discovery, analyze it, and really get into that. And maybe with time, after a couple of sprints, more like innovation work and knowledge sharing can start. And more towards the end, it will be mostly knowledge sharing, I would say. So, yeah. It won't be like always the pattern, but that's what I'm thinking.
I think it would be fair to say as well, like, for instance, Abdul, like, the core work isn't always going to be technical work. I mean, when we talk about modernization, it's not just modernizing software, but also modernizing processes as well.
It's kind of interesting, right? If people create this boundary between technical and non-technical work, but realistically, we know there's a continuation. So if we talk about, for example, the core work, a lot of the core work will involve probably a lot of modeling, trying to understand the business domain and understand, what are the business problems trying to be solved, and that should, good software, that should reflect in the software. So there's this clear kind of continuation, if you will, between what we would think of as business and technology. Really, they should be kind of reflections of each other, and same is obviously true from the organization perspective, right? So if you've got teams that are working in their old manner, maybe they're in that kind of growth mentality, and just putting stuff in and making it work, which is fine. There's that aspect then, as you said, of trying to change behaviors and potentially put in mechanisms that facilitate the kind of new way of working that's a bit more established and sustainable. So kind of sustaining that innovation rather than creating new innovation per se as a business unit. So I always think it's really important, and I do think it's something that's often missed. And I think without it, what you have is regression. You'll create an area of modernized software, and as Maciej said, you've not enabled other teams to then continue that on and continue on the practices that enabled that. And in the end, the people revert back to type what works for them. And if that happens, then inevitably you'll end up back where you started.
I think you touched on something there that I think is just probably crucial to the context of software modernization, which is sustainability. And that organizations find that their behaviors or technology choices have led them down a path which now means that it's not as sustainable as maybe it once was. And this goes back to what you're saying at the beginning, Mac, around sort of greenfield development, and maybe certain decisions at the time were sustainable for a period of time, but then over time it becomes unsustainable. And the same is true for the modernization as well. The changes you're doing must also be sustainable. The knowledge sharing, etc. Everything has to be done with that view that your software obviously must be sustainable and sustain business for many years. But it's also the practices, the processes. You can't just have some short-lived effort. If you can't sustain that, over time, say you modernize one system and you realize there's three more. You need to make sure that you can do all of them if that's what you need to do, but focusing on the highest priority one.
You can think of a situation where, like, the company says we need to upskill our people, right? They need to be like, know about the state-of-the-art things and do things in a state-of-the-art way. And they send them for those like weekly coaching sessions and maybe buy them some on-demand videos, and lessons. And yeah, they go for those coaching sessions. They watch some videos, but after a month, they are again back in their routine business as usual things, because there is nothing inside of the organization that pushes for that, really. And with that modernization effort, you always have that well-oiled, like, steam engine, really always modernizing. So they are doing the work, but always being there to share that knowledge, always being there, like, present, that anyone from the product teams can always ask for advice, pair with them, see what's going on, join some seminars, some updates, like what are the things we're trying to modernize. So, and it's always there. It's not an ad hoc thing. It's always there. So that's the key thing.
It's like some decisions maybe are driven. I mean, Simon Sinek talks about this in one of his books on leadership. But around sort of the dopamine driven behaviors, you're kind of going for that sort of instant sort of gratification, and that would bring a whole new meaning to DDD, where it'd be like dopamine driven development. But like it would be the idea that you're making decisions for the short term. And not thinking about the long-term sustainability. And admittedly, we don't all have crystal balls, and we can look into it and say, oh, this is the exact 100% right decision. But you can make a fairly good stab at it, and sort of look around and survey the landscape and say, actually, what we're doing right now isn't sustainable. Although it's got us to where we are, it's not something that's sustainable. And I think it requires someone quite aware to be able to say, we need to make some changes.
It's really important to realize that I think contexts change underneath your feet. You establish a new equilibrium. And I think you can go wrong on both ways, right? So you often see kind of startups or small technology stacks, like, okay, we're going to implement Kubernetes. We want a full scalable web service that can take 10,000 customers and all that kind of stuff. But you're not in a state where you're serving 100. So why are you worrying about the scalability? It's a nice problem to have. Wait until you have it. But at the same time, if you come from that mentality, or you probably got it right early on, and you're just getting it out, seeing what works with customers, and you've got software that works, and then you kind of scaling up, and the solution is put another rack of servers on there. Get the software on more instances, just balance it better, and you just keep going. And then suddenly the rules are all different. And it's like, okay, no, we're not going to do any more feature development until we understand how we're going to scale our software. How will we make it, as stateless as possible? How will we make it such that we're serving as many static assets from edge as possible? You've completely changed the paradigm. And if a lot of individuals have been there from day one, that's a really tall order. Like, psychologically, it's a very big tall order, I think. So I think, that's the other challenge you face into. I don't think, more often than not, they're not wrong. They were right. But the situation has changed, and it can be quite hard to see that, considering you still work in the same office. Maybe there's more people, but it's the same company. I do think that could be almost like a bit of like an internal culture shock.
What you touched on there is the fact that nothing's ever static, right? Mark Manson says in one of his books that only our problems change. That you get more money, you have different problems, right? And it's true. Your decision making can't be static and say this is it. This is the decision. Sit back in your chair and watch it. You have to constantly be sort of introspecting and looking at the situation and saying this is maybe not what we intended, and accept the fact that you're going to make decisions as well that maybe don't give you the desired results. But that's why, as you said, you need that fast feedback on those decisions and be like, actually, this isn't the way to go. Let's find another way. And then that's true in modernization as it is in sort of greenfield development as well.
So this constant dance between like the tactical aspects and like the strategic aspects, right? If you go to too much strategic and be boggled down in strategic stuff, you won't keep delivering things that you need to deliver like on a daily basis. But on the other hand, if you focus too much and be very short-sighted, it's like you miss like, what are we trying to really achieve in here, right? So we are modernizing this critical workflow, but still it's the QA is the bottleneck, right? It's like we still are able to maybe do faster development there, but still like QA has so many things to do and there's really little automation. It's like, it's still the same problem, right? And that bit of strategic thinking that might be part of the picture, part of the puzzle up front, might have prevented that to some degree, let's say. So, and yeah, in modernization, there's always that balance, right? So keep delivering those improvements, those innovations, but also thinking about the bigger picture. What are we trying to achieve? Like increase the lead time, reduce the number of bugs that we introduced, like reduce the amount of time it takes to address these, right? What are we trying to achieve here? And these things may change during the year, right? Like you mentioned, right? It's a floating pointer,
I think as well, particularly with organizations where there are external influences, that can have an impact as well and change direction as well, because maybe you do have to switch a little bit between the strategic and then the tactical. For instance, sometimes, oh, we're going to, we're going to retire this service or whatever, or even the fact that maybe some companies aren't retiring it, but they're changing their pricing structure. And this again goes back to what I was saying around maybe in the early days development. It was great. You're using a service that you didn't really notice that it was that expensive. But then as you grow, it becomes quite expensive, third party to integrate with, and then you're like, well, actually, we need to do something about that. And then you make the decision. I mean, again, as I said, just accepting and acknowledging that is a step in the right direction, I think. But yeah, there's loads of factors that will obviously change direction for a team.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point about the organizational aspect as well. I think there's a propensity to a lot of our work exists within the context of the organization's health, and typically when does an organization realize they might need to modernize? I find it's usually when things aren't going so well. But at that point, investment is already likely drying up, right? Investors are looking at you maybe a little side-eyed, and maybe sales are not seeing the same growth they used to. So it's not as easy to get that kind of line of credit that you then need to invest, which then creates the kind of, not a catch-22, but the uncharacteristic aspects of when things are going best. It's probably when you need to modernize, right? Like when you're not feeling it is the time to go back and think, okay, what should we do? And I guess it's very much in line with Kent Beck's idea, right? Like once you've got over that hurdle, okay, we need to introspect and invest. And when you look at modernization, it is a huge investment. I mean, I think all of the kind of big tech companies at one stage ended up spending billions on re-architecting their internal systems to then match their new scale. So I do think timing and, as you say, that kind of like organizational pressures play a big part. And I think it's difficult to know, like, when is that right time? Like, when's that time you stop and you say, okay, this is it. We need to now invest a lot of money in bringing in those modernization teams and getting our platform to a level so that, when we do face the hard days, we're not making the decision that late on.
I think as well, there's almost like different types as well. Because I think, as you said, it is an investment, but I think sometimes the companies do burn maybe money on the wrong types of modernization. Like we've all seen it where, we have this particular framework, we want to move to this one. And often those decisions aren't maybe rooted in like sound decision making. And that can burn some money because, I don't know, just to give an example, I don't know, we were using React and we want to move to Vue or something like that. And maybe that doesn't actually solve the problems that they have, but, maybe it's like, this will help because, Vue say, there's this 20 times better or whatever. Again, I'm just checking out numbers here, but I think the investment, I think you have to be quite careful at looking at modernization and think, where do you want to invest your money? Because there are certain types of work where you will invest money and actually not get the return on investment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think I know it's probably only a proliferary item, but the point on the React, I think it's really on the point, because I really think that a lot of companies feel modernization is about moving from one tech stack to another tech stack. And I think it's one of the worst things you can possibly do, because as you say, you cut all your problems from one technology to another one. You go from a monolith to a microservice, or micromesh. You go from, you say, maybe like React to Angular, and really all your problems are still there. I think you're absolutely right. Like being smart about how you invest, and I think less buzzwordy about where you invest. Investment and modernization is really about the software itself, like the actual software and how it reflects the business capability, how it's written, how clean it is, and the kind of test coverage in there. Has almost, in my mind, very little to do with the actual tech stack. That's usually more operational than fundamental. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that brings us to probably the topic we'll be discussing next time, which is like how to manage and lead like a modernization effort, really, right? Because like you need to be reaching out and thinking outside of the box, have that, the vision and like how to change things, because most likely those stakeholders, they won't know why. That's why they have you, like, to figure that out. But also you need this like grounding in terms of like managing this thing so that it brings business value, and it brings on an iterative basis, ideally, the business value, not in a couple of years, that we can measure something. And that's kind of the challenge, right? So this is like this dichotomy of trying various things, like thinking outside of the box, but also being grounded that there is this ROI in here, guys. It's like we need to think about this as well, right? You can try the different tech stack, that's fine, but let's come back in 2 months. Is this potentially going to increase our lead time or the quality, so there are less bugs in the production, or those like key metrics, let's say. So, but I guess this is a bigger topic for next session.
It takes me to a real life example, actually, where I had an issue with some pipe work in my house, and they sort of were looking at how they could fix it. Where basically it was the pipes were too close to the plasterboard, so you could see like it's like condensated, basically all the moisture and stuff on the plasterboard. And they said, "Oh yeah, we can put some, like, they call it like blacking or something around it. They could put some material around the pipes." I mean, that wouldn't fix the problem, because admittedly you're putting something between the pipe and the plasterboard, but then you're actually making it bulge out even more. They're already too close to the plasterboard, and now you're going to make the pipes basically stick out even more. So you, and it's just like something. I mean, that's maybe a silly example, but it is sort of like, are you actually fixing the underlying problem, or are you just doing something that is maybe a distraction? It doesn't give you that sort of return on investment. But yeah, no, it's a super interesting topic that I'm sure we can dig into.
It's very interesting because, again, it's like those modernization teams, they have the stakeholders, and like, where does the responsibility lie? I think it lies like most in the modernization team, and try to stand up sometimes to the stakeholder and say, this is like with your example, right? It's like, this is not the best way actually that you would like us to go with this. This is the proper way. But then actually they may come back, well, yes, but there's this new release and we need to be like really faster for the next one to be before the competition. And that's fine. That let's go for that. But maybe later, let's go for more like foundational change, let's say. So again, the answer is the balance, right? But the modernization cannot be always just saying yes to whatever stakeholder business is saying. They should be also the proactive force in like going further with their ideas and what they think.
And you're right, it is a balance. Like even when we go back to that pie chart of sort of like the core work, maybe the innovation and the knowledge sharing, it is a balance, and it doesn't mean that balance is static as well. It doesn't mean that you're always going to achieve a certain ratio of those. At different times, as you said earlier on, like the innovation might be like a larger portion of that pie chart than the core and the knowledge sharing, and that I think is a crucial sort of lesson in any project. But it's like things are never static. You can't just say this is exactly what we're going to do and we're never going to veer away from it, and this is the perfect ratio. Things are going to change, and you have to be able to adapt to those. And as you say, create cases to your stakeholders, make a case for why things should change. Why you've sort of veering away from maybe the original agreement or making amendments. It's because, that agreement was made on X date and, things have changed. We discovered things, etc. So, And on modernization, you discover a lot. Once you start getting under the surface, you find lots of things. And that's hence why you have innovation and knowledge sharing sort of built into the modernization work.
Yep, that's your like SLA, right? So dig in and so like what's really going on, like how to do this properly, right? How to change this properly, right? So, but like innovation part is like sometimes this core work, which in the end is some kind of an innovation in its own self. So maybe in some later sessions we can delve into what's the difference between this like core initiative and this innovation seeking actually, because that's also very interesting. What's the distinction in there? There's no clear distinction, but there is some kind of a distinction as well. So, but that's a whole topic in itself.
We obviously got plenty more to talk about, and maybe next time we can dig into that around sort of managing software modernization and all within that. But I've super enjoyed this chat. Any closing thoughts, Abdul, on that?
The kind of high level thought in my mind is it's very contextual, isn't it? Trying to work out balances between what to pick up, when to pick it up. There's a lot of judgment call in there about the structure of your work, and a wealth of knowledge to work out how to get it right, I guess.
I hope that audience starts to understand like this uniqueness of this modernization team, modernization project or effort, however you call it, compared to those other typical projects or endeavors that you see in IT actually. So I hope we are clearing it out a bit.
I hope we are demystifying it as opposed to mystifying it. But yeah, we can always change the title, right? But yeah, no, I think for me the sort of key takeaway was sort of the discussions in terms of the return on investment, and how. And I guess the thing to dig into as well would probably be one of these discussions is sort of recognizing when to modernize, as you said earlier on, Abdul. But yeah, there's loads we can talk about, and as you said, I hope we are demystifying the discussion. But I guess until next time when we carry on the conversation, thank you very much everyone for watching and listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.